Welcome to Afrivio Chronicles, where we reawaken the legends, reclaim the glory, and tell the stories that were silenced for centuries. You know the story they tell you about Egypt. Pyramids, pharaohs, Cleopatra. But what if I told you there's a chapter they deliberately left out? A chapter so explosive it changes everything you thought you knew about African history. What if I told you that for nearly 100 years, Egypt was ruled by black Africans from the south? Not as slaves, not as servants, as pharaohs. They called this kingdom Kush, and these weren't just any rulers. They were the Black Pharaohs, and they built an empire so powerful it humbled Egypt itself. The textbooks barely mention them. The documentaries skip right over them. But I'm here to tell you their story. And trust me, you're not ready for this truth. Let's set the scene. We're talking about 750 BCE. Downstream, Egypt is weak, divided, corrupt. The priests are fighting the nobles are fighting each other. It's a mess. Now look south. Up the Nile, past the cataracts, in what we now call Sudan, there's a kingdom rising, Kush. For centuries they'd been watching, learning, building. These weren't primitive tribespeople. Kush had been a civilization for over 1,000 years already. They had their own pyramids, their own writing system, their own iron industry, one of the most advanced in the ancient world. And they looked north at Egypt's chaos and said, enough. Enter Piye. That's P-I-Y-E. Remember that name. This man wasn't just a king. He was a believer, deeply religious, devoted to the god Amun. And when he looked at what was happening in Egypt, the temple desecrations, the moral decay, it offended his soul. So around 730 BCE, he does something unbelievable. He gathers his army and he marches north, not to raid, not to pillage, to liberate. Think about that for a second. A black African army marching into Egypt to save Egyptian religion from the Egyptians. Piye wasn't messing around. He besieges cities that resist, but when they surrender, he spares them. He restores their temples. He shows more mercy than they ever showed his people. The final stand happens at Hermopolis. The local rulers barricade themselves inside, thinking their walls will save them. Piye's response? He builds siege towers higher than their walls. When he takes the city, he doesn't massacre the inhabitants. He goes straight to the stables because the local ruler had withheld his best horses from tribute. Piye writes, "I will not let even a single horse be hidden from me." The man cared about principles. By 716 BCE, his brother Shabaka completes what Piye started. All of Egypt, from the Sudan to the Mediterranean, is under Kushite control. The 25th Dynasty begins, the age of the Black Pharaohs. And now here's where it gets beautiful. The Kushites don't come as destroyers, they come as restorers. For decades, Egypt had been falling apart, temples crumbling, art stagnant, culture decaying. The Black Pharaohs launched the biggest building campaign since the New Kingdom. They rebuild temples from Karnak to Thebes. They revive ancient art forms. They restore religious ceremonies that had been abandoned. Taharqa, now that's a name you should know, becomes pharaoh in 690 BCE. This man, he was magnificent. He builds monuments everywhere. He develops agriculture. He expands trade networks that stretch across Africa. Under Taharqa, Egypt becomes wealthy again, powerful again, respected again. The Nile Valley experiences a renaissance that hadn't been seen in centuries. And the art from this period? Look at the statues, unmistakably African features, full lips, broad noses, tight curls. These pharaohs weren't hiding who they were. They were proud of their Kushite heritage. They didn't want to be Egyptians. They wanted Egypt to remember who saved them. But nothing golden lasts forever. Enter the Assyrians from the north. Iron weapons, advanced military tactics. They want Egypt, and they don't care about Kushite restoration projects. The Assyrians march south with their iron and their siege engines. Taharqa fights them. Oh, he fights them. Battle after battle. But the Assyrians keep coming. In 621 BCE, they take Memphis. Taharqa retreats south. He tries to rally. He even recovers Memphis briefly. But the writing is on the wall. The final Kushite pharaoh, Tantamani, makes one last attempt around 665 BCE. He actually recovers most of Egypt for a moment, but the Assyrians return with overwhelming force. This time, they sack Thebes itself. The destruction is catastrophic. The Kushite pharaohs retreat up the Nile, back to Kush, back to their homeland. But here's what they don't tell you. This wasn't the end of Kush, not even close. For nearly 1,000 more years, 1,000 years, Kush continues as a major power. They move their capital to Meroë. They develop their own script. They build hundreds of pyramids, more than Egypt ever built. When Rome conquers Egypt, they look south at Kush and think about invasion. The Kushite queen Amenarrenas meets them at the border, one eye missing from battle. Absolute legend. She leads her army against the Romans, captures Roman statues, and buries them beneath her temple steps so Romans would have to walk under her feet to retrieve them. The audacity! Kush remains independent for centuries after Rome falls. They outlast their conquerors. So why don't we know this story? Why is Kush a footnote? Because this truth is dangerous. It destroys the narrative of African inferiority. It proves that Africans not only built great civilizations, they conquered and ruled one of the greatest civilizations in history. The evidence is everywhere. The pyramids at Meroë, there are over 200 of them still standing in Sudan. The statues in Cairo Museum that clearly show African features. The accounts of Greek historians who describe the Kushites as the most ancient and virtuous of peoples. But you have to look for it, because they don't make it easy to find. Think about what this means for us today. Every time someone says Africa had no history before slavery, every time they act like civilization only came from the north, every time they try to whitewash ancient Egypt, remember Kush. Remember Pai marching north to save a civilization. Remember Taharqa building monuments that still stand. Remember Amenarrena staring down the Roman Empire with one eye. We weren't just victims of history. We were makers of history, shapers of civilization. So the next time you hear about ancient Egypt, I want you to remember this. The story doesn't end at the Mediterranean. It continues up the Nile, into the heart of Africa, where Black Pharaohs built pyramids that still touch the sky, where an empire rose that would humble Egypt and defy Rome, where our ancestors proved that African greatness isn't just possible, it's ancient. The Kingdom of Kush isn't lost history, it's waiting history. And now, you know.